Welcome back. It is matchups that matter. This video should help you set your lineups this week in fantasy football. A reminder that our weekly rankings for week 2 are now live. Get them for free with an underdog sign up, link down below, or get them on flockfantasy.com, code FSE. Our rest of season rankings are also now live over on the site as well. But basically what we're doing in today's video is we're going through all of the games in the week 2 slate, talking about game environments, which ones project to be good matchups, which ones project to be bad matchups for all the positions, over-unders, implied point totals, where the sharps are betting. All of that stuff is covered. What I recommend doing is if you have a couple start-sit decisions, make a checklist, go through and check and X out things as I go through. For example, if you have to decide between Lad McConkey and Jackson Smith-Njigba, then you'd be able to go through and kind of check off the boxes that match each guy. So let's go through the week 2 slate. Top 5 over-unders on the slate are on my left, bottom 5 over-unders on my right. The top 5 games that we're looking at in terms of players that we want in these games: Detroit Lions, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, go Bucks, big rematch of the divisional round playoff game last year. Arizona Cardinals and Los Angeles Rams, also a very good matchup. The home team is on the left side of these charts. Miami Dolphins, Buffalo Bills, that of course is on Thursday Night Football tonight. Kansas City Chiefs and Cincinnati Bengals, also going to be an interesting game. And then Philadelphia Eagles, Atlanta Falcons. If you have start-sit decisions with players involved in these games, particularly if they are on the favored team, then you definitely want to probably put those guys into your lineup as a tiebreaker, and vice versa. If you have start-sit decisions involving Denver Broncos, New England Patriots, Pittsburgh Steelers, Carolina Panthers, Tennessee Titans, some of the teams in these matchups with the lower over-under ones. We have a couple more games this week that are under a 40-point over-under point total, as opposed to last week when most of the games were above 40 points there. In terms of implied totals, this is basically the spread with the over-under information as well. This is always a good gauge as far as what teams you want to be attacking. The Detroit Lions are, again, implied for the most points on the slate. They were implied for the most points last week as well. Philadelphia Eagles also implied for a lot of points. Kansas City Chiefs, Dallas Cowboys, and Houston Texans. Again, very good offenses. We expect these teams to score a lot of points. You want to fire up a lot of your Texans, your Cowboys, your Chiefs, so on and so forth. And vice versa. Las Vegas Raiders implied for the least amount of points against the Baltimore Ravens this week on the road. Carolina Panthers also not implied for a lot of points. Denver Broncos, Patriots, and Titans. So over-unders can be deceiving sometimes, and implied point totals can be deceiving. That is why we also like to look at the sharp betting trends to determine, some of the games that could go over, some of the games that could go under in their respective matchups. As you can see there, the Detroit Lions-Buccaneers game, already the highest total on the slate. The sharp money is actually on the over in that game, so definitely want to be attacking that one. Same goes for the Cowboys and Saints, already a high total. Over is getting the steam there, and same with that Cardinals and Rams game, already getting some steam on the over. Patriots Seahawks, a low total, but it is expected to go over according to the sharps. And then we also see some of the potential trap games here. Dolphins Bills on Thursday night tonight, catching a lot of steam on the under, and then Eagles and Atlanta Falcons also catching some steam on the under. I believe that game is on Monday Night Football as well. So those are the sharp betting trends. Let's get into some advanced data points where we look at pace of play. And what pace of play just means is that when one offense is on the field, they're trying to run a lot of no huddle. They're trying to move up tempo. And the more pace of play that there is in a game, the more plays that are going to be run on offense. And both teams in most of these cases are fast-paced offenses. You can see the Cowboys and Saints, very fast-paced offenses last week. This data is from week 1. Patriots and Seahawks, also both fast-paced offenses, at least in the 1-week sample that we have so far. Panthers and Chargers, fast-paced game there. And then also the Eagles and Falcons. So even though it's expected to go under, we do have a good pace of play. It looks like that Cowboys game is a trifecta, and what a trifecta means is that it's a high point total, it's expected to be fast-paced, and the sharps are on the over in that one. So the Cowboys and Saints game, definitely a likely candidate to go over. And we also see some of the slowest paced games of the week. That Broncos-Steelers game, the slowest paced, one of the worst games to attack this entire week because they're two potentially bad offenses, low over-under, and the pace of play is not expected to be good. Chiefs-Bengals, also a slow-paced game. Texans-Bears, a slow-paced game, so on and so forth. So looking at some of the offensive DVOA matchups versus the defensive DVOA matchups, basically What I did to calculate offensive DVOA is I took their marks last year and I added in the week 1 sample that we have, because I don't think it's really going to make a lot of sense to go off a 1-week sample, but I also don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to go off of just 2023's numbers as well. But as you can see there, some expected candidates to have a good offensive matchup here: Baltimore Ravens, Buffalo Bills, Kansas City Chiefs. We expect those offenses to have good DVOA matchups week over week because they're good offenses. But the Chargers and the Packers both expected to have really good matchups as well. I know the Packers, of course, don't have Jordan Love this week, but it is expected to be a relatively easy matchup. And that Chargers-Panthers game is one that I am personally going to be attacking with a lot of my start-sit decisions. Some of the biggest disadvantages, you can see the Jets and Titans. Of course, a lot of those numbers came with Zach Wilson as the quarterback, so not nearly as doomsday of a scenario for the Jets offense. But the Cowboys, not in a great matchup. The Broncos, the Bears, and the Saints, all not particularly in great matchups there. Let's move into the shadow coverage matchups, which of course is going to affect a lot of your guys' top wide receivers in fantasy football this week. You have DJ Moore going up against Derek Stingley. He is expected to be shadowed by the Houston Texans' #1 corner. Romeo Doubs versus Jalen Jones. I don't think anybody's starting Romeo Doubs anyway, so not a huge deal there. DK Metcalf versus Christian Gonzalez. So he was actually shadowed last week against Patrick Surtain. Expected to not really see a great matchup again this week. George Pickens versus Patrick Surtain. Obviously, we saw what he did to Metcalf last week. He did a great job of him, so not a great vote of confidence for George Pickens managers. A.J. Brown versus A.J. Terrell. I think A.J. Brown's a good enough receiver to win that, so I wouldn't be too worried. And then Cortland Sutton versus Joey Porter Jr., and he did a great job against Drake London last week, so keep that in mind. Couple matchup downgrades. Again, just some wide receiver groups that have some bad matchups this week. We have the Raiders receivers going up against the Baltimore secondary. Not a great matchup for Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. We have the Houston Texans wide receivers against the Chicago Bears corners. The Bears have a pretty decent secondary. Could be tougher sledding than for Nico Collins, for Stephon Diggs, and for Tank Dell. The Bengals wide receivers, however many of them play, if it's just Jamar Chase, obviously he's not going to be in a good spot. But if T. Higgins does suit up for this game, he won't be in a good spot either. And then the Tennessee Titans wide receivers, Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, Brian Thomas, and Christian Kirk, also not in particularly good matchups. Conversely, we also have some better matchups for some of these wide receivers here. Malik Neighbors going up against the Washington secondary. The Buccaneers absolutely shredded them through the air last year, so he could be in for his first big game of his career, and I would definitely recommend going and trading for him now before that ends up happening. Amari Cooper versus the Jacksonville secondary. I think a big bounce back is in store for the Browns passing game. Terry McLaurin versus the Giants secondary. Michael Pittman, Adonai Mitchell, and whoever else versus the Green Bay secondary. And then the Buccaneers wide receivers, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan versus the Detroit Lions secondary. So those are some good matchups. Those are some bad matchups. As I talked about last week, what I used to do last year was I just go through, position by position and talk about which position groups had good matchups. This year, what I'm actually doing is I'm going to look through my weekly rankings. I'm going to go through the matchup charts myself and give you guys 5 must starts and 5 must sits. Our weekly rankings are very accessible if you want to know specifically who has good and bad matchups. Check them out on Underdog. Check them out on the site, both linked down below in the description. So I'm going to use the research I've done on the slate so far and give you guys some flex options. Everybody that I talk about here will be ranked outside of my top 24 wide receivers and running backs. So these are not obvious must-start names. Like I think you guys know to start like Nico Collins, for example, this week. I think you know to start Mike Evans this week. So we're talking about players that are ranked outside of my top 24. We're going to start with my number 1 must-start wide receiver or running back this week. And also, whoever's ranked number 1 is my highest ranked of this group. Tank Dell versus the Chicago Bears, 26 implied points for the Houston Texans this week. That's a top 5 mark on the entire slate. 45% air yard share for Tank Dell in week 1. It's a good defense, like I mentioned. The Bears secondary is pretty good, but I do like the Texans to still put up points and rely more on their passing game than they did last week on their running game when they basically dominated the time of possession by handing the ball to Joe Mixon over and over and over again. I do think that CJ Stroud is going to have to throw the ball a little bit more in this game, so I like Tank Dell to have a bounce back performance after Nico and Diggs were the ones who got the shine in week 1. Jaden Reed versus the Indianapolis Colts. Now, I get it. Nobody wants to start Jaden Reed probably because Malik Willis sucks, but this is a well-coached team. Jaden Reed looked like a star in week 1, and not only that, but he is the easiest target of this group to hit. You think of Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, they're all outside wide receivers. Malik Willis going to have to throw outside the numbers down the field to those guys. But Jayden Reed gets manufactured touches. Jayden Reed gets screen passes. He gets carries. He is going to be the guy that takes the pressure off of Malik Willis this week. So I do really like Jayden Reed still to be a good starter in this matchup against the Colts. As I talked about, also expected to be a good matchup advantage for the Green Bay Packers offense because the Colts defense is not very good. Then we get into Ladd McConkey versus the Carolina Panthers. He was a rookie wide receiver in his first NFL game last week, and he came in and commanded 32% targets per route run and a 28% target share in his first NFL game. That is a big deal. Carolina looked very, very beatable through the air last week if you watch that Saints game, and they lost their best defensive player with Derek Brown in that game. So their defense got even worse than it already was. I feel really good that the Chargers offense is going to probably put the hurt on Carolina, and it's going to be yet another blowout victory against the Carolina Panthers. DeAndre Swift versus the Houston Texans is also a pretty good start this week outside of top 24 running back territory. Not a great week for him last week. Obviously, he wasn't very effective, but it is an easier rushing matchup, and DeAndre Swift actually had really, really solid usage in week 1. You can see there 66% of the snaps. He got most of the carries. It was just a bad outing for the Bears offense. I don't think this necessarily will be a huge bounce back performance, but I do think the Texans are beatable on the ground, and DeAndre Swift operated as the clear #1 running back there. Moving into Najee Harris, who's my last must-start player of the week against the Denver Broncos. It does not take a genius to realize that the Steelers are going to want to run the ball in this game, and it's going to be a gross slugfest. Najee Harris has the third easiest matchup among all running backs this week. His split with Jaylen Warren when Jaylen Warren was coming back from the hamstring pull last week was very favorable for Najee Harris. So I do think we could see more of the same for Najee this week, and he could have a great performance against the Broncos. I think the Steelers are expected to win that game. I feel pretty good about him. Conversely, let's talk about some players that I don't really want to start this week. These are considered must-sits for me in the Week 2 slate. No need to really mess around with these guys. Everyone is dealing with full rosters for the most part. Like, nobody has major injuries outside of Puka Nacua managers, outside of a couple players here and there, T. Higgins and maybe Raheem Mostert managers. So you shouldn't have to dig too deep to find good starters. I would try and avoid starting Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He split touches evenly with Jaleel McLaughlin in week 1. It's a horrible matchup. Javonte Williams didn't look particularly good. Audric Estime was put on IR, which is good news for both Jaleel McLaughlin and Javonte Williams, but I do think that this is going to be a rough matchup for the Denver Broncos offensive line. I think the Steelers are going to do a good job stopping the run, making the rookie quarterback beat them. And it's going to be a tough matchup for the Broncos there. So that is partially why I traded Javonte Williams away in our Flock League. And make sure to go check the link down below in the description for the Flock League channel. I traded Javonte Williams away to Mason in a package deal for Amari Cooper. Number 2 must-sit player here is Zach Moss against the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City has a great run defense. Zach Moss, last week, he found the end zone against the Patriots, but this week I feel like it'll be tough sledding, and I think Chase Brown will work more into the backfield than he did last week. The Bengals looked rough, and traveling to Arrowhead is probably not a good solution for that. So whether T. Higgins is playing, whether Jamar Chase is playing is not really that relevant. I think that the Bengals are just going to be this slow starting unit, and I do think that Zach Moss is probably not somebody that you want to fire into your lineup. So Deontay Johnson versus the Chargers, also not somebody I want to trust this week, mainly just because I don't trust Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers at all. The Chargers defense already did a good job last week against the Raiders, another bad offense that was struggling, and they limited Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers' output, and Deontay Johnson just flat out didn't look good in week 1 against the Saints, so I do not like starting him until we see some real signs of life from this Carolina Panthers offense. Same goes for Calvin Ridley against the Jets. The Titans equally looked really terrible in week 1 on the offensive side of the ball. Will Levis particularly looked bad, and also too, Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed really put the clamps on Brandon Ayuk, and maybe not so much Deebo Samuel, but Brandon Ayuk had a rough game against them on Monday night, so I don't think that Calvin Ridley is going to have a great game against this awesome Jets secondary. Courtland Sutton versus the Pittsburgh Steelers is the final must-sit of this video, expected to be shadowed by Joey Porter, as I talked about already. He clamped Drake London in week 1, allowing just 1.7 fantasy points on the 65% of the routes that he traveled with Drake London on. So I think that Courtland Sutton and the Broncos passing game in general is just in for a brutal matchup this week. So let's talk about some streamers. For those of you guys that are looking for quarterback production off of the waiver wire, maybe you lost Jordan Love, maybe you don't want to start Joe Burrow, maybe you don't want to start Brock Purdy or Trevor Lawrence or one of the other guys that you may have drafted. I have Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford, and Baker Mayfield as quarterback 11 through 13 in my weekly rankings this week. All ahead of Joe Burrow, all ahead of Brock Purdy, all ahead of Aaron Rodgers, Justin Fields, Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, and Caleb Williams. So if you have any of the quarterbacks I just named, and Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford, Baker Mayfield are available on your waiver wire, I'm absolutely going to prioritize those guys, because with Goff and Mayfield, it's a high-scoring game environment, highest over-under on the slate. The Sharps are on the over. Matthew Stafford, same thing. Sharps are on the over in that game. And the Rams threw the ball like crazy last week against the Detroit Lions, and they have an easier defense. The Cardinals are terrible against the pass. There's a very good chance that Matthew Stafford and the Rams are able to cook this week. Cooper Kupp is like a top 3 receiver for me on the week. Everybody probably spent big on Demarcus Robinson and Colby Parkinson on the waiver wire, so I feel really good about their matchup. So if you can get one of those 3 quarterbacks this week, if you're looking to stream because you had an injury or because you're looking for a better option, I really like Goff, Stafford, and Mayfield, and I would start them in that order if you have a choice. And I know it's disgusting. Maybe this is just for DFS and Superflex leagues, but I do actually not hate Deshaun Watson this week. He actually runs the ball. He's a good scrambler. Again, I think he has a chance to bounce back against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the week 1 shellacking that the Dallas Cowboys put on the Browns will be kind of forgotten a little bit. I don't think he's necessarily going to look great, but he is a good fantasy quarterback, and I think the Browns' offensive line should be healthier in this game and is a much easier defensive matchup against Jacksonville than it was against Dallas. So moving into the streamer of the week for defenses, this streaming defense week is definitely all about the Los Angeles Chargers. They were my top streamer last week against the Raiders. My number 4 defense in totality on the week against the Carolina Panthers this week, only behind the Ravens, only behind the Jets, and only behind the Steelers, which I'm assuming are widely owned defenses in most of your leagues. I also really like the Commanders defense if you're looking for a low-owned kind of defense there. I don't really trust them as a unit, but the Giants, Daniel Jones, there's a chance that they have like a pick 6 or something, and the Texans defense as well against Caleb Williams did not look really good in his first game. I think that there's a chance that he could turn the ball over. Keep in mind, we don't have a whole lot of data on these defenses yet because we don't know how the offenses are performing, and also too, we don't know which defenses are necessarily good or which ones just had good matchups in week 1. But the key simple rule of thumb here is that if you're looking for a streaming defense and you don't know which one to go after, find as many of these checkpoints as you can. Good real-life defense, bad quarterback and bad offense that they're going up against, ideally favored per Vegas, ideally at home if you can possibly swing it. The more boxes that you can check there, and also potentially targeting low over-under games, then the better off you are. If you can check all 5 of those boxes, you have a great streaming defense. For example, the Chargers are one of those type of defenses this week. Then we get into the kickers. Again, if you do need a kicker this week, I think there's tons of great matchups for Jake Elliott, Jake Moody, Chris Boswell, Brandon Aubrey, who I'm assuming is obviously rostered in your league, and Kaimi Fairbairn, who's probably also rostered. If you can find one of those 5 kickers available on the waiver wire, definitely go out and get them. But there's also good matchups for Jason Myers. There's also good matchups, any high-scoring game environment. You want to grab the Rams kicker, you want to grab the Cardinals kicker, you want to grab the Buccaneers kicker, you want to grab the Lions kicker. Any high-scoring matchups are always good bets for kicker production as well. And also Jason Sanders has a great matchup tonight on Thursday Night Football if you're looking for him. So this was Matchups That Matter. Hopefully I help you guys set your lineups. If I did, leave a like for me down below. Comment down below any of your start-sit questions. I will try and answer as many start-sit questions as I possibly can for the first 2 hours that this video is live. I promise to answer every single question that we get in the first 2 hours of this video. So make sure you're watching this right away. Every single week, if you want your questions answered, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Check out our site, Flock Fantasy, for a number of different things. Rest of season rankings, weekly rankings. You can ask us start-sit questions over there as well. And you can also see a lot of our other stuff. If you're looking for dynasty rankings, trade value charts, if you're looking for other bonus content from us, that is where you can get it, flockfantasy.com. And of course, make sure if you are watching Thursday Night Football tonight, I am rolling out this pick'em. If you guys want to tail me, go ahead and do that. I will warn you that I have been 0 for 3 on Island games so far this year. However, I've only missed by 1 pick'em every single time, and I do feel like this is the game that will get me healthy. If you tail this pick'em and you add in the CeeDee Lamb all customer special or the Josh Allen new customer special, you would win up to 20x your money. Maximum $10 is what you're able to put down on that. So if you're interested in that, check out Underdog Fantasy. They are going crazy with all of the promos that they have going for week 2. Check them out. Hit the link down below in the description. Deposit $10. Use code FSE, and you'll actually get our weekly start-sit rankings all season long, totally for free in your email inbox within 24 hours. So if you're interested in that, link down below in the pinned comment. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.